I'm a man who doesn't surprise easily. But a recent conversation with a friend not only surprised me, it surprised me so much that it started me on a journey halfway around the world and left me a lot more than surprised by what I discovered. I'm a filmmaker. For 40 years I've been producing and directing television news and current affairs programmes and making documentary films. I see myself as a modern version of an old-fashioned storyteller. The stories I tell are as varied as the human condition. They can be funny, sad, depressing, uplifting. But probably the most important thing I can do is to, sometimes, present the audience with more than just information or entertainment, with something that has the potential to actually make a difference to their lives. Never over 4 decades have I come across a subject with as much potential as this one to change lives, maybe even save lives.
Chronic illness that we're already seeing. The Western civilizations will not be able to afford the coming tsunami of chronic illness that we're already seeing.
Thyroid cancer in the U.S. is the fastest growing cancer. Cancer of the breast is occurring in 1 in 7 women, and cancer of the prostate is in 1 in 3 men.
Sickness is the biggest business on earth. It's bigger than war.
Kids on 6, 7 drugs who are 6 or 7 or 8 years of age, that's just an abomination.
This is something that can be remedied. If you bring in vitamins to that, it's 80%.
We should not be dying from cancer. Don't die of something that not even our livestock are dying from.
Through the entire history of life on the planet, vitamin C is the reason that life was able to survive and progress.
The body knows what it's doing. Nobody believes this anymore.
The vast majority of Americans are deficient in multiple nutrients.
Why don't we pay attention to what's going on inside of our own body?
My journey began when a friend of over 30 years told me how his life had been suddenly and radically turned around. He'd finally got a handle on the depression that had plagued him for years. Quitting sugar was the first step. That began to lift the fog. And the second step? Well, Trevor had watched a documentary called Food Matters and heard one of the contributors, Andrew Saul, recommend treating depression with niacin, vitamin B3.
Because Andrew was so credible in the movie, and as I looked into his backstory, there was no financial motivation for him. He wasn't saying the things he was saying for any reason that he sold supplements or whatever. So I literally got in touch with him through email and said, listen, I'm coming to the States, I'm going to be close to where you live, would love to call in and chat to you for half an hour. Now, actually, that wasn't particularly true. I was going to be in the States, but I was a long way from where he was. But he agreed. And I spent half an hour with him. He told me I should also take B vitamins and chromium would help me. And with the help of those things, it really made such a huge difference to me.
If the key to Trevor's cure was something as simple as a bunch of vitamins, why aren't doctors prescribing vitamins instead of drugs? Ireland, where I live, has one of the highest suicide rates in Europe. So what's going on? Trevor's experience made me want to find out more, and one of the first stories I came across seemed little short of miraculous. In New Zealand, Alan Smith was on life support. His team of consultants agreed he couldn't survive and wanted to turn off the machine. Alan's family fought to have him given huge doses of vitamin C. He dramatically recovered. That story inspired New Zealand police officer Anton Kuraya. Doctors said his acute myeloid leukemia was too aggressive for further treatment, and they sent him home to die. He too started megadose vitamin C, and he too recovered. The more I researched, the more stories I found of patients beating illness when medication had failed by taking doses of vitamins hugely in excess of recommended daily amounts. I've always had pretty good health. And what Trevor had gone through was making me think seriously about this for the first time. I realised that most of us experience medicine as the treatment of our symptoms rather than the underlying cause of our ill health. Is it possible that nutrition can treat the root cause of sickness as well as the symptoms? Well, why don't we try to find out, Trevor said. Meet some of the world's top vitamin experts and see what they say. So that's what we did. Andrew Saul lives modestly in a small university town in upstate New York. An expert in nutrition with a PhD in human ethology, he's ploughed his furrow in natural healing for over 30 years. He's the best-selling author of more than a dozen books translated into a host of languages.
High doses of vitamins prevent and cure real disease. Cancer can be treated with vitamins, particularly intravenous vitamin C. Mental illness, schizophrenia, psychosis, even attention deficit disorder, fabulously treatable with high doses of vitamins. Alzheimer's disease can be reversed, that was the word, with vitamins. You have to use a lot. Vitamins can treat any viral illness. You can treat heart disease with vitamin E.
Well, this is certainly news to me. How have I spent 40 years as a journalist and filmmaker and never heard this? And Andrew's also saying that proper nutrition can help prevent a lot of these conditions happening in the first place.
The advice from conventional health authorities is, well, you should eat better. Well, we're not. We're just not. So we're going to have to do something else. And that means we're going to have to, in addition to educating people to eat right, we're going to have to get them to take supplements and take extra nutrients. Even if you are eating really well and have an organic plant-based diet and really do everything right, you're still not going to get enough vitamin C. You're still not going to get enough vitamin E as an Edward. So these have to be supplemented if people are going to have optimum health. And when people have optimum health, they don't get sick, or they don't get sick as often. Or if they do get sick, they get better. And if you use really high doses of vitamins, you can actually reverse the disease. So you have vitamins as prevention, and then you have vitamins as treatment.
I've always accepted the standard message. Fast food is bad, fresh fruit and veg are good because that's where we get our vitamins and minerals. Ease off on the salt, fat and sugar, get some exercise, and hope you don't have a hereditary killer lurking in your genetic makeup. If you do get sick, you go to the doctor. He gives you something to make you well. But Andrew's telling me there's decades of research to show that vitamins can work as well as, sometimes better than, prescription drugs.
For 65, 75 years, there's a long track record of well-qualified physicians that have already done this. We already have the proof. Megavitamin therapy is safer than drugs, more effective than drugs, and cheaper than drugs. But because we've been taught to be consumers of modern medicine, we can't believe that anything safe and cheap can be effective, or anything cheap and effective can be safe. If we have modern medicine continuing the way it's going, we're going to have a study of what happens when you put poisonous chemicals in malnourished bodies.
What I can't understand is why, assuming all this is true, the medical world isn't treating people with vitamins. If it's so successful and so well documented, why isn't it common practice? Well, Andrew says it's because nutrition has never been part of medical training. Even today, it isn't. And that suits the pharmaceutical companies just fine.
Doctors are well-meaning people who have lots of education and they're very busy. And they have a belief system. And their belief system is that if they don't know it, it's probably not worth knowing. The rest of us have an equally problematic belief system because we believe that if the doctor doesn't know it, it's not worth knowing. There's a defensive, almost a bunker mentality that we have to use conventional medicine. And if conventional medicine doesn't work, there's nothing else you can do. If you limit care to a single-party system driven by the pharmaceutical industry, and people are still dying by the hundreds of thousands and millions, indeed, millions every year, something's wrong. So if someone's dying of cancer and they've never been offered nutritional therapy, that is criminal. It is equally criminal to fail to educate physicians so they would be able to make the offer.
I've gone through my life believing in traditional medicine and that the doctor knows best. But one of the people I've come to Florida to meet is a doctor who turned his back on all that 30 years ago. From Daytona Beach, he runs one of the biggest medical websites in the world, a website that last year attracted an incredible 80 million visitors. I love people who aren't afraid to step on toes and tackle the system, and he is certainly one of those. He's confronted the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, many times and has their warning letters to prove it. Dr. Joe Mercola. You seem to be quite a controversial character.
No, that is absolutely incorrect.
Well,
I am a controversial character.
but one of the things I love it doesn't bug you at all. You seem to like being a thorn in the side of those who inject.
Yes, that perception is correct. I have committed my life to exposing this fraud, this deception. I mean, life is short, and I've acquired enough resources to be comfortable, and I don't need any more. So I'm absolutely committed to generating an informational educational campaign that will expose the truth so that people don't have to die needlessly and suffer painful, miserable deaths that they don't have to, all for the primary benefit of improving the bottom line of these large corporations. So that's what we seek to do on the site, is to provide people with simple, inexpensive, natural therapies that will address the foundational cause of disease, and also expose the frauds and the scams, the lies, the deceptions that industry puts out there to deceive people, to take them away from the simpler, almost invariably less expensive approaches.
In his early career, Joe was dispensing medication like any other doctor, until he realized that much of what he was doing was applying a barely effective band-aid. He had started his medical career full of enthusiasm for natural healing.
But I was brainwashed in the traditional system. Even though I was passionate about health, I got caught up in the process that pretty much brainwashes almost everyone who goes to medical school, and that drugs and surgery are the primary treatments for all disease. They fail to virtually ever understand or recognize or treat the foundational causes of disease.
Why are more medical professionals not aware of this?
Well, it's not by accident. It's actually by carefully planned design, because the medical industry is, I believe, it's the largest industry in the United States, with literally trillions of dollars, $3 trillion a year annually. So there's lots of revenues, and as a result of that, there's incredible incentives to discourage approaches that would take away from that revenue stream.
Medical schools get a lot of money from drug companies. The media gets a lot of advertising revenue from drug companies. Researchers get a lot of research grant money from drug companies. And government is lobbied to a tremendous extent by drug companies. So we have this situation where the pharmaceutical industry has way too much influence on what doctors learn.
From Bonita Springs in Florida, Sayer G. runs Green Med Info. He provides easy access to natural medicine research documents in the otherwise difficult to navigate National Library of Medicines. So far, he's covered 1,700 different topics. Sayer suffered a range of illnesses since childhood and eventually broke free of medication using nutrition.
My understanding of modern medicine is it's really no longer related to the art and science of healing. It's really about creating a commodity out of disease and symptoms. And it's a very effective model because, of course, when you suppress a symptom, often of chemical poisoning, with a new patented chemical called a pharmaceutical, what you're doing is creating an even deeper condition that's going to sprout up in new symptoms which are treatable. So it's an infinite growth model.
Sayer has been astounded by some of the research papers he uncovered.
Yeah, one study really blew my mind, which was when they took a cancer cell in a petri dish and they administered vitamin C. What they found was that the cancer cells started to differentiate back into a type of cell that was healthy. So it started to actually go from a cancer cell to a non-cancerous cell just by administering a little bit of vitamin C. And so what that showed me was that, oftentimes there's research on vitamin C killing cancer, but sometimes it's more a matter of it just re-educating the cell to behave in the way that's supposed to. You're a hair cell, you're a heart cell, you're a liver cell. Here's the nutrient that it needs to do that.
I have one final visit to make in Florida, to someone else who was let down by traditional medicine over many years before making a full recovery through taking charge of her own nutrition. Looking at Erin Elizabeth, it's hard to imagine the catalogue of problems she carried since childhood. She now helps others overcome the kind of issues she still finds it difficult to talk about.
It was amazing to me how many, especially women out there were who were like me, who just had given up hope and had put on a lot of weight and just felt like there was not going to be, that there was no light at the end of the tunnel, that there was no fix. And so I like to help them with the information that I can provide to turn their lives around, because I was kind of at the point where I felt that I'd hit rock bottom.
So what's the starting point for someone who feels as low as Erin once did?
To never give up hope that it might be a rough road, because for me it took a long time and it's not necessarily going to be overnight. Even with my weight loss, it may have been 90 days, but it took me a long time to even get to the point where I knew what the heck was wrong in order to make the changes to get better or to lose the weight.
Dr. Alan Gaby has seen many patients recover dramatically where traditional medicine failed. He adopted a nutritional approach at the outset of his career 40 years ago. He's now regarded as one of the foremost authorities in the world and is the acclaimed author of the Nutritional Bible. This incredible piece of work covers 400 illnesses and is based on a lifetime in personal practice and assessing every piece of research he could find.
Having seen about 6,000 patients, having reviewed, analyzed, and critiqued more than 30,000 research papers, I can confidently state that nutritional medicine is a safe and effective alternative, or in some cases an adjunct or addition to conventional therapy. In my own practice, of the 6,000 patients I saw, and many of them had failed conventional medical treatments or not tolerated the treatments, 80% had worthwhile improvement. I mean, most of the chronic illnesses I can think of have a nutritional and environmental component to them. A lot of people don't tolerate refined sugar. Many people have hidden food allergies, hidden meaning they're not aware of them. And when you identify them and talk them into removing them from their diet, their chronic conditions get much better or go away. And many people have a higher than normal need for various nutritional supplements, either because of genetic factors or because the environment they don't tolerate, or because the disease itself sometimes increases their needs, or because the medications they're on increases their needs. So when you have an individualized program of nutrients and diets, I would guess, and this is a guess, but it's an informed guess, that if society were to embrace a nutritional approach and that the patients were willing to follow the recommendations, which are not always easy, that the cost of healthcare in this country would drop within a couple years by at least 50%.
Back home in Belfast, I have 2 beautiful granddaughters. Thinking about their future makes me think about my own. I want to be around for them as long as possible. But I'm also interested in finding out if the experts think there's anything I can do to benefit their nutrition. They've already needed medical treatment, as did my children when they were small.
I raised my kids all the way into college, and they never had a single dose of any antibiotic, not once, not ever. The kids did occasionally get sick, but not as often as their friends. And when they got sick, we did something about it. We gave them very, very high doses of vitamin C, which works as an antiviral, an antibiotic, an antihistamine, an antipyretic, which means it lowers fever, and an antitoxin. This is physiology, not philosophy. It works. My children now have said to me that they're going to do the same thing with their kids, and my daughter is.
I wondered, with the passage of time, did Andrew perhaps view his daughter's childhood years through rose-tinted glasses? Does Helen recall things the way he does?
We were raised in a household where vitamins and nutrition were the answers to our health problems. And not only did we take them to prevent issues, which was ideal, but if we got sick, we took vitamins and we used nutrition to help feel better. And we did it without drugs. We did it without antibiotics. And I know my father says, and he'll say it until he can't anymore, that we were raised all the way into college, my brother and I both, without a single dose of an antibiotic, which is not something many folks can say. And to this day, so far, I can also say the same for my children. My son is a little over 1 and my daughter's over the age of 3. And so far, they haven't had to take an antibiotic. And the key is we haven't needed to take one. I'm not against medicine, but I'm against taking it if there's a better way, a more healthy way. And there is.
So Helen's clearly on message as well. But if what they're telling me is true, surely this kind of information can't be buried in some sort of conspiracy by the pharmaceutical companies. And while Andrew's certainly engaging and passionate, why should I even listen to him instead of accepting conventional medical wisdom? After all, he's not even a medical doctor.
Well, if you want a medical opinion, you should go to a medical doctor. And if you have a medical issue, you should go to a medical doctor. If you want to learn about nutrition and how it works, I'm not sure a medical doctor is your go-to person. My background is education, not medication. My training is in the sciences and then in teaching. I've taught every grade there is, all the way from first grade through postdoctoral. We need to learn what to do. And no one is telling you on TV, no one is telling you in books or movies, no one is telling you in a doctor's office how to use high doses to cure disease. And nobody's going to tell you how to get to bowel tolerance of vitamin C. Nobody's going to tell you how to reverse multiple sclerosis with high doses of vitamins. Nobody's going to tell you exactly how cancer is treated with vitamins. No one's going to tell you exactly how to reverse arthritis with vitamins. And no one is going to be able to tell you which doctors did it. This isn't my knowledge. I stand shakily on the shoulders of giants. These are real doctors that did this for 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years. And this information is life-saving.
I don't think I can stress it enough, because this is information you're not getting at your doctor's office. And even if your doctor's really good, they're not going to sit down and talk with you about high doses of vitamins to prevent and cure illness. And my dad has dedicated his life to bringing this information to people, and doing so without getting paid by any vitamin companies. He just does it because he knows it's the right thing to do, and it's going to help people so much.
See, I believe, as many people who practice this type of medicine, that our bodies were designed to stay healthy. We are if left to its own means, given the right information and foods, our body will go towards health. It does not go naturally to disease. We're not designed to be sick. They're designed to be healthy. The key, though, is to provide your body with what it needs. So that it's understanding that, giving them the right food. So frequently, and the central core of that is eliminating processed foods, eating real foods, ideally fresh, locally grown and organic would be the best, and eliminating lots of the sugars and the grains and the flours, and because those disturb the insulin resistance and they perpetuate these chronic degenerative disease, arthritis, peptic ulcer, anxiety, depression.
Joe still takes the time and makes the effort to grow some of his own food. He particularly recommends sprouting sunflower seeds.
They start to come up. And so this is maybe 3 days after it was a seed.
Yeah.
And then another. The vast majority, well over 90%, 95% of your food should be freshly prepared, real food. The simple rule is that someone, either you or your spouse or someone you employ, has to spend some quality time in the kitchen. There's just no way around it. I mean, that's by design. If you rely on industrial processes to prepare your food, you are going to die prematurely and most likely come up with a whole variety of diseases that you are not going to want. You're going to have arthritis or ulcers or you name it, heart disease, cancer, diabetes. These are all you're going to have an increased risk for if you have a diet that's predominantly full of processed foods.
When you read these studies and you realize some people go into remission just by getting vitamin D or vitamin C, you think, oh my gosh, this is the magic bullet I've been waiting for. And then over time, I started to look more into food and the power of it to provide not just material building blocks for my body and energy, but information, packets of gene regulatory information that are able to make my DNA work better. And as I got more into it, I realized it had to come from a really good source, like organic and ancient soil, biodynamic farming. And so I would start focusing on eating foods that made sense in terms of the history of my body.
As agriculture has become more industrialised, the nutritional value of food has decreased. Joe says it's exceptionally difficult to get all we need from food, so we have to take supplements starting with vitamin D and vitamin C.
Almost everyone's going to benefit from some type of regular vitamin D supplementation. That will literally epigenetically influence about 3,000 of our genes to improve and optimize health. 3,000 genes, that's 10% of our genes. Vitamin C is another great nutrient. I think if you haven't made the transition to or commitment to a healthier, unprocessed food diet, then you may want to consider that, because at least getting that in a regular form, even from a synthetic version, is going to be better than not getting it at all.
I have to admit, I'm impressed. Everything I'm hearing seems very plausible. But smarter people than I am have been duped by fake doctors and quacks. Could Andrew, who I'm relying on very much, be leading me up the garden path? His old college professor, Dr. John Mosher, certainly doesn't believe so.
Yeah. Well, I first met Andy when he was 16 years old, and he was a sophomore at State University of College at Brockport. And he came to my office because he was interested in going overseas to study science. He was a pre-medical student at the time. Well, going from that 16-year-old young man in my office, who eventually went to Australia to study science at Canberra University, he's become one of the foremost experts in the world. And I've seen him develop from struggling, not being helped by family, friends, or society in general. And he persisted in what he knew was right. Sort of like Davy Crockett said, when you know you're right, then go ahead.
I had a bout of influenza not too long ago, and this is what happens to anybody when they get run down or they don't follow the rules or they eat too much pizza. And I was taking 30,000 milligrams of vitamin C per dose. Now you just have to think about that for a minute. That's 6 rounded teaspoons of ascorbic acid at one time. 30,000 milligrams of C per dose. And the symptoms were gone in less than 2 days. Just the economics of this make it interesting. What if companies didn't have people out for a week with the flu or 2 weeks with the flu? Think of the money they'd save, but think of the pain and suffering you'd save.
That may sound like a lot of vitamin C Andrew was taking, but he's adamant that even huge doses of vitamins won't damage you, won't cause kidney stones, and definitely won't kill you.
When we looked into this very carefully, we were able to see no support whatsoever for the notion, for the legend, that anyone has ever died from taking a vitamin. If someone finds that evidence, I'd like to see it. Every year in the United States alone, the most conservative estimate is that 80,000 people die from medication properly prescribed and taken as directed, just in hospitals. This does not include medical errors. This does not include intentional abuse. This does not include patient noncompliance. This does not include anything but the straight and narrow. There's just no way you can be comfortable with that, because that puts prescription drugs taken as directed and properly used in the top 10 killers of Americans.
I'm in New York to meet a psychiatrist who no longer prescribes pharmaceuticals, but only natural medicines. She relies totally on vitamins and other supplements, and is very successfully treating the women who make up the bulk of her patients. Her first step is a 30-day organic whole food diet, and she finds that alone can have dramatic effect. Dr. Kelly Brogan.
I still find it shocking that a given patient who has been essentially polluting her body, let's say, for the past 3, 4, even 5 decades, can undergo such impressive clinical change in the space of 30 days. I find it nothing but a testament to the resiliency of the human body.
It's Kelly's experience that we all need supplements just to stay well, let alone when we're sick.
I love the idea of using food and only food. I think it's a romantic notion. And I think there probably was a large swath of human history where that was absolutely the only medicine needed, a la Hippocrates, right? Unfortunately, and particularly over the past 150 years, let's say, since the Industrial Revolution, we have done quite a number on our environment and have essentially rendered ourselves subjects in an uncontrolled experiment. Because of this, I think that it's imperative to support native physiology with supplementation, from glandulars to micronutrients to fatty acids to probiotics. I think it's a requirement even for wellness, let alone for healing.
In New Jersey, Dr. Derek Da Silva is something of a celebrity with his own television and radio show. He too is successful treating patients nutritionally, and he strongly believes we all need at least 3 supplements.
The 3 things that I have all of my patients do are probiotics, vitamin D, and omega-3s. Why? Probiotics. 60% of our immune system resides in our intestine. The good bacteria or probiotics are responsible for digestion, elimination, and making most, if not all, of the B vitamins. That's number 1. Number 2, vitamin D. Vitamin D has numerous effects, but the most important effects are, number 1, has an apoptotic effect, and it has an anti-angiogenic effect. What does that mean? Apoptosis is the natural death of abnormal cells, cancer cells. Number 2 is that it has an anti-angiogenic effect, meaning it blocks the formation of new blood vessels for the spread of various cancers, because that's how cancers spread. And number 3, omega-3s. Why? 60% of our brain is fat. That's where the word fathead comes from, right? Because our brain is all fat. The entire nervous system is coated in fat. So dropping these cholesterol levels too low is going to affect your brain function. But not only that, having omega-3s, having the right fats in our system is critical as we get older for hormone production. Testosterone for men, estrogen for women. So without adequate levels of fat, not only is your brain not going to function well, but also your hormones are going to get thrown off.
What I'd like to suggest that people do is to once in a while go to a health food store. Patronize them. First of all, it's nice because the small health food stores deserve your business. And secondly, they smell great. And thirdly, they're run by people that I think really care about what they're doing. If I had one wish, I would ask everybody to get 4,000 or 5,000 milligrams of vitamin C a day. I think that would change the face of healthcare as we know it. I think we'd live longer and feel better. The body takes in about 3 dozen nutrients totally, but you're made out of 40 trillion cells. And there are thousands of chemical reactions in the body. Many of these reactions will only occur in the presence of a vitamin. Vitamins typically are coenzymes. That means they work with an enzyme to achieve a reaction. If you remove that vitamin, it doesn't happen.
Andrew certainly puts a great deal of faith in vitamin C, not just for chronic illness of all kinds, but even for a sore toe. Well, tell me what your story is.
Well, about 15 years ago, broke my toe. Was healing, but about 3-4 months into it, I still had some pain. So I happened to call Andy about that, or maybe something else. So he says, take vitamin C, get up to bowel tolerance, which I did. In the space of a week, that toe stopped hurting and hasn't bothered me since.
When you say you took large doses, what sort of doses
I was
were you
probably at between 12,000 and 15,000 milligrams a day.
And for how long did you keep
About
that
a
up?
week. About a week. And within a week, I had no more pain in that toe. And it hasn't bothered me since. Ever.
Fantastic. That's a
It's
good
been
story.
really, really
Good story.
excellent. Yes.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much indeed. Well, while a healed toe won't exactly change the world, my travels are certainly giving me a new perspective. In fact, I believe I'm becoming a convert. I'm accepting most of what I'm uncovering. Of course, I've found individuals and groups critical of Andrew Saul and the others, and who question the whole validity of megadose therapy. But I'm definitely coming to the conclusion that the evidence speaks for itself. My next stop is a few miles outside London to visit a health researcher, writer and international speaker. From the English countryside, he publicises medical studies the mainstream media ignores. Studies by doctors and scientists around the world demonstrating the powerful benefits of supplements. Philip Day.
I'm very, very passionate about this whole idea of megavitamin therapy. I've seen the doctors get very excited about it. Everyone from doctors in America using it for high-dose intravenous therapy for cancer, and they're using heavy amounts. They're using 100 grams a day upwards, through to high-dose fat diets for epileptics and depression, vitamin D therapy and niacin therapy for depression, vitamin A emulsion therapy for cancer. You know, some of the top clinics in the world are using these types of treatments now.
Acknowledged internationally as a natural health expert, Philip says the main conditions people ask him about today, like cancer, depression, fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue, hypothyroidism, all have a common root.
These are 20th century problems. These are problems that roared into prominence during the early to mid part of the 20th century, which coincidentally or otherwise was when we began to heavily refine the diets and flood chemicals into the system.
He says the authorities today often treat vitamin therapy the way they treated the first notion of limes to prevent scurvy.
Had you walked into the Admiralty, what passed for the British Admiralty, who lost 1 million sailors between 1600 and 1800, had you walked into the Admiralty, said all you need to do to solve the strategic problem with your navy, right, is to add limes to the provisions, you would have been hounded down the street. Very similar to today. And yet, is that the truth? Of course it was the truth. So there's a classic example of megavitamin therapy applied in the 1800s, which had groundbreaking implications for modern medicine, and yet, it was completely blanked. It was completely blanked, and it's being blanked today.
And does Philip, along with his wife and young daughter, practice megadosing?
We have a policy in our household that everybody takes vitamin D and enough of it. Vitamin D is so primal in the way the cell operates. It underpins the immune system and cellular repair. And the bottom line is, in Britain, we live in a country that hasn't seen the sun since 1968. Everyone's vitamin D deficient. We've got 4 to 5 million people with brown or black skin living in a country where they aren't getting adequate sunlight. And if you have brown or black skin, you need a lot more sunlight to make the same amount of vitamin D than a fair-skinned Celt, for instance. So vitamin D, big issue. That's the elephant in the living room right there, the very first thing. So from age 18 months, Anna started a graded supplementation of vitamin D. She goes to a school where kids are dropping left and right from whatever's going around. Anna doesn't drop. I've even got parents coming up saying, why does your daughter not get sick? And the bottom line is she's taking vitamin C, and she's taking her age in grams of vitamin C a day. She's taking her body weight multiplied by 40 of vitamin D3 every day. And that's ongoing. Away she goes.
This is the college that I attended between 1970 and 1974, the State University College. I was a very young lad when I started college. I was only 15. And I would, of course, spend 4 years to get the bachelor's degree. One of those years was in Australia at the Australian National University. Sometime after that, I came back and did a master's degree at Brockport as well. And then ultimately, some years after that, I taught here in the health science department. I consider myself to be kind of the ringmaster of the greatest nutritional show on earth. And I feel that I'm bringing people in to the big top, and I'm giving them a show which they didn't expect. That's better and more important than they ever imagined. And I'm not the key player. I'm just the impresario. And I say, in ring number 1, we have Abram Hoffer. In ring number 2, we have Robert Cathcart. In ring number 3, we have Frederick Robert Klenner. And coming in the next half hour, we've got Drs. Wilford and Evanshute. We have all of these physicians, doctors who spent decades of their life healing people with high doses of vitamins. And they all reported the same thing. They said, vitamins are better than drugs. They're safer. They have practically no side effects. Nobody dies from vitamins. They're cheap, they're effective, and they get the cure quicker. And for those who criticize this, I say, what part of this bothers you? I mean, what is wrong with healing people with high doses of vitamins?
Toronto, and the 44th Annual Conference of the International Society for Orthomolecular Medicine, simply put, nutritional medicine. Doctors and nutritionists from all over the world gather to share the latest research and catch up on new developments. A diverse group united by their belief in the power of nutrition. David Brownstein describes himself as a holistic medical practitioner, combining the best of alternative and traditional treatments. He says iodine deficiency is the direct cause of the cancer epidemic in America. Of 6,000 patients he's analysed over the years, 96% were deficient in iodine.
I've talked to practitioners around the U.S., outside of the U.S., in almost every major Western country. They're seeing very low iodine levels, and iodine is necessary for proper brain function, for proper thyroid function, for heart function, for endocrine function. I mean, every cell in the body needs and requires iodine.
David took the traditional route through medical school, but after just 6 months in practice, his outlook changed.
I realized that something was wrong, that I wasn't really treating the underlying cause of my patients' illnesses, and that, more importantly, they weren't getting better. And I was having to treat them with one drug to treat the problems of another drug, and another drug to treat the problems of those drugs. And more importantly, they just weren't getting better from their illness. And I thought I couldn't do this for the next 30 or 40 years.
David's first steps in holistic medicine were actually treating his own father, with some dramatic results.
My father had his first heart attack at age 40, his second heart attack at 42. By the time I finished medical school and residency, he had a couple of bypass surgeries and 3 or 4 angioplasties. He was on 12 different medications to control blood pressure and diabetes and hypertension. He was having continual angina for over 25 years. And the 2 natural therapies I tried on my father were natural thyroid hormone and natural testosterone. And within 7 days of putting him on those therapies, his 25-year history of angina melted away, never to return. His cholesterol in the 300s on cholesterol-lowering medication fell below 200 without changing his horrific diet and lack of exercise. And more importantly, my father looked better and acted better. No longer did he look like he was going to die at any moment. We were able to decrease his medicine load 3/4. Really, once I saw the changes in my father, I knew that was the type of medicine I wanted to do for the rest of my life.
My own mother lived to 90, but spent the last years of her life suffering from dementia. I asked David for an example of a similar female patient he treated.
But the vast majority of patients, especially the elderly, are markedly deficient in vitamin B12. It helps treat things like Alzheimer's and pernicious anemia and confusion and mental decline. On my history part of the exam, she was taking statin medications, which are known to cause memory problems in people. And on my laboratory analysis of her, she had very low vitamin B12 levels. So when I met back with them to go over the results, I prescribed 2 things for her, high-dose vitamin B12 and coenzyme Q10 because she was on the statin medications, and I told her to stop the statin medications. And within 3 or 4 weeks, her memory started to return. Within 2 or 3 months, she was back to normal, able to take care of herself, able to go to the grocery store, and was off all the other medications that she was on. And that's one example of patients that we see all the time.
Such is the diverse nature of conference delegates that the next person I met is a Canadian MP, James Lunny, a former chiropractor committed to natural interventions and nutritional supplementation for his patients. He pointed me to a very practical example of how the medical establishment in Canada is resistant to supplements, trying to shut down a $500,000 university study treating 3,000 patients for bipolar disease.
Now, because we were able to intervene in that file, the substance is still available. It's vitamins and minerals and amino acids. But Health Canada did their best to shut it down, putting the health of thousands of Canadians at risk because many of these people had come off toxic chemical substances being managed under conventional care, and they didn't want to go back on the conventional drugs. They'd recovered their life, they're working, they're happy, and many of them with the support of their medical doctors. But the system is very resistant to looking at simple things that aren't approved or managed by the conventional system.
And Jim's view of what we all need to do?
Everybody needs a vitamin supplement, a quality one in my worldview, and you certainly should be supplementing with vitamin D. We could save $14 billion a year in healthcare costs just by elevating Canadians' levels of vitamin D. But if we follow Health Canada guidelines, they say 1,000 is enough. It's not. The experts that are recommending I take 5,000 a day. And cancer's down, mental health is up. Almost any disease you want to name is down because vitamin D3 is so important to physiological function.
That diversity of orthomolecular experts and the subject matter of the papers they're delivering was in my head again when I met Tom Levy. He has the unusual distinction of being a cardiologist and an attorney. Now, my father died from a heart attack, and I happen to have had a long-running gum infection. So Tom's presentation directly linking mouth infection to heart attacks, as I told him, scared the pants off me.
It should. It should. But more than frighten you, it should, after you've thought about it a while, alleviate a large amount of your stress because just like the physicians, most, if not all, lay people think getting a heart attack is bad luck. Getting cancer is bad luck. Getting any chronic degenerative disease is bad luck. And I want to tell you, the data now shows luck has nothing to do with it. That, in fact, the root canal and the periodontal disease is the direct cause, not correlation, cause of heart attack 90 to 95% of the time. What made this so compelling was in 2013, a research group in Finland showed very elegantly, I couldn't have put together a more elegant study. They actually suctioned out the blood clots in patients that presented with heart attacks, sucked out the blood clot, opened up the artery, and then analyzed the blood clot. And using very sophisticated PCR testing that can really detect minute amounts of nucleic acid, DNA, RNA, they were able to show not only did these blood clots contain the same typical pathogen profile that's seen in root canals and infected gums, but they were able to show that that blood clot had a 16-fold higher concentration of these pathogens than the blood sample, the arterial blood around it.
Tom says vitamin C can help in at least some cases of dental infection. He studied it and used it for many years.
I've had a couple cases of infectious mononucleosis, college-age kids that were literally sick for months and needed to drop out of school because they were so ill that somehow found out about me and the potential benefits of vitamin C. And both of those individuals were completely clinically resolved within 48 hours by giving intravenous vitamin C infusions. I was able to play a role in a case of acute Lyme disease, not chronic, acute, where the classical lesion came up after the tick bite and then a really horrible syndrome. And that was able to be resolved with 5 or 6 days of intravenous vitamin C.
Now this is vitamin C. And a lot of people think that 500 milligrams or 1,000 milligrams of vitamin C is a megadose. Well, this is 1,000. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. Don't want to overdo. That's 16,000 milligrams of C. And it's time to take it.
And this is not just for the benefit of the camera.
No. I don't always take 16,000 milligrams per dose. I always take at least that much per day in divided doses, which is best for most people. But if you're sick, or if you're under stress, and that would be me this time. We've done a lot of filming, traveling, I've done a lot of talking. I feel just a slight thickening and swelling in the throat here, just a little bit of soreness in the throat. So I'm going to get out in front of this and follow my own advice. If you're in good health, that might do it. If you have hepatitis, that wouldn't do it. Same human being, different circumstances.
All right, guys, time for C.
All right, time for C. Go get C. Warren, you want C? Yeah.
Now, I just gave her 2 500 milligram tablets of vitamin C, chewable vitamin C, because the kids can chew it up easily and take it easily. And Warren, he's only 2, and so he's getting 1,000 milligrams of vitamin C at every meal and every snack.
Say that again, 1,000 milligrams.
1,000 milligrams every meal, every snack. So I'd say on average, Warren at the age of 2 gets 4,000 to 5,000 milligrams of vitamin C a day.
On a normal day?
On a normal day, right. So when there's even a hint of a cold or, a sniffly nose or a sneeze, we increase that dose. And I basically give him enough until they are symptom-free.
So some parents may feel that's an awful lot of vitamin C for 2 very small children.
It is, but what's great about vitamin C is that there's an indicator. You know if they've had too much because they start to have loose bowels. Now, obviously with children, you don't want to have loose bowels and diarrhea because then they get dehydrated. That's not what we're going for, literally. So, or figuratively. So what we want is to have just enough so they feel good and you get the result you want.
Helen's about to publish a new book to follow her first, dealing with some sensitive womanly issues.
Such an uncomfortable topic for people to discuss. Nobody really wants to say anything about it because, it's kind of gross. But that's the whole point, is that we're kind of shy, and then we go to the store and we get that medication and we go home and we take care of our yeast infection and we hope nobody knows about it. But ladies don't have to do that. We have another way. You can treat infections naturally by taking, once again, megadoses of vitamin C and taking other immunity builders and infection fighters like vitamin A and vitamin E, and making sure you get enough vitamin D. I'm also honored to be part of Dr. Atsuo Yanagasawa's book, Radiation and Vitamin C Therapy, for that. And he's just a brilliant man with groundbreaking research that people really need to know about. And I'm so excited to be part of that project.
And Atsuo Yanagasawa, the renowned physician Helen is writing that book with, has come from Japan to the Toronto conference. He's making a presentation about his success using vitamin C to treat girls who've suffered adverse reactions to the HPV vaccine, designed to prevent cervical cancer. He gave me one case study.
One girl with a mother visited my clinic, and she said she has involuntary movement and convulsions. It's a really very severe convulsion with leg and arm, and very also tremor is showing. And I treated her first 12.5 grams of vitamin C, and the next 25 grams of vitamin C. It's a quite high dose for the girls, but it's really effective.
How many doses do you give someone? Does it go on for days or weeks? How long?
Yeah. At first, I treated her with twice a week, then once a week, and sometimes every 10 days.
Atsuo has also become widely known for his work in the wake of the Fukushima nuclear disaster, using megadose vitamin C to neutralize the cancer risk for workers there.
We give vitamin C 5 to 10 grams, and also we administered vitamin C intravenously every 2 weeks. So 2 months later, all the cancer risk score returned to normal levels. That means vitamin C can neutralize the cancer risk scores.
One of the most important vitamins we are using is vitamin C, both orally and intravenous. High doses of intravenous vitamin C have shown to be very, very beneficial to people because they help to have more energy, they have better mood, and in general they have a better health feeling. Thousands of diabetic people, people with hypertension, with cancer, with depression, with anxiety, and many other diseases, because this therapy is helpful for almost all the diseases.
I often use vitamin C and the B vitamins, especially vitamin B3 I find very interesting, and some minerals like magnesium and zinc can be a good addition. Vitamin D, one of my first patients when I used high-dose niacin was a man who had been on lithium and other conventional medications for several decades. So I decided to give him niacin and increased it slowly until 3 grams a day. We were able to take away the anti-anxiety, the benzodiazepine, and the sleeping drug. And I hadn't thought at that time that we would be able to take away lithium, but the patient asked me, and we decided to very slowly, when he had been on niacin for half a year, try that. And after some weeks, he was better.
In the morning, I would take a magnesium tablet. This is a form of magnesium that's easy to absorb. It's called magnesium citrate. It's not expensive. Magnesium oxide is a bad choice. Can't absorb that in a bed. This is coenzyme Q10. Think of it as an energy coenzyme. This is some mixed antioxidants that are especially good for the eye. This is niacin, a 500 milligram niacin tablet. Dr. Abram Hoffer would say take 2 of these a meal. So I do. 400 units of vitamin E is an eddy. This I will take twice a day. Phosphatidylcholine is important in your body because you absorb the choline and you make the neurotransmitter acetylcholine out of it. It's good for the skin. It's been shown to help reduce the symptoms of dementia and improve short-term memory. Although I forget where I learned about that incident. This is a somewhat natural, high-potency multivitamin. For it to be high potency, you either have to use the laboratory products in there, or you'd have something the size of a football. Most vitamin research uses laboratory vitamins, and they still work, with the exception of vitamin E, where you have to have the natural form. Not everybody wants to take a handful of vitamins. They should at least take a multi. I think you need a multivitamin with every meal. This is chromium. Chromium is a trace mineral that helps to regulate blood sugar. This is a zinc gluconate, an easily absorbable form of zinc. Men need more zinc because they lose zinc in seminal fluid. This is a B complex capsule. This is all the B vitamins, again, like the multiple in one convenient location. This is a probiotic supplement. I take this because it contains more strains, maybe 10 or 20 strains of beneficial bacteria, and yogurt has fewer. And finally, we have vitamins A and D, and you can pay a lot of money for these, but these are very inexpensive capsules of A and D, and I take a number of those. My father could take this without any water at all, but that I cannot do.
Michael Gonzalez has a lifelong passion for basketball. He plays, and he's encouraged his sons to do the same. In fact, the older one's turning out tonight with professional team Bayamon Vaqueros. Michael is also quite possibly the man behind one of the most dramatic events in Olympic basketball history, back in 2004. The Puerto Rican team manager had heard how Michael's work treating cancer patients with vitamin C was increasing their vitality. And 2 days before their Olympic qualifying game against Canada, he arranged for the players to have intravenous vitamin C, multivitamins and supplements. Against the odds, they won.
So they beat Canada 2 days after they had this therapy, this intravenous vitamin C and the supplements. And they were very happy, but the story doesn't end there. It's that when they went to the Olympic Games in Greece, they had to face the United States Dream Team, which is the most fierce team, basketball team in the world. And they beat them by 19 points. And it was the first time that the Dream Team loses an Olympic competition. And Puerto Rico did that, having IV vitamin C in their veins. So.
But I haven't come to Puerto Rico to talk basketball. This is where the theory of metabolic correction has been developed. The belief that nutritional supplements can fine-tune our bodily systems, right down to the metabolism of a cell. That certain nutrients have the capacity to turn genes on and off, and while we can't alter our genes, we can change how those genes express themselves. Michael Gonzalez and Jorge Miranda-Massari believe cancer is a metabolic disease, and they've been successful treating it nutritionally. Their passion comes from direct experience. Jorge lost his wife, the mother of his 2 young children, to cancer. Michael lost his grandparents and his mother.
The cancer is part of your body. It's your body going weird. So we have to bring it back. And how we do that? We change the environment that produced that weirdness, And the way of doing that is by diet and supplements.
You don't just kill cells, like chemotherapy and radiation will work in a certain way, but it doesn't improve mortality. What it does is that it reduces tumor. It will give you response. So it's good to have response, but it's even better if you decrease mortality and improve survival. That's what you actually want. You don't want just to improve momentarily. Because if you have response, but then you're damaging your immune system, which is the one that takes care of detecting abnormal cells and eliminating them, then you don't have the protection from the body. So that's why you have recurrence. First, if you're giving chemotherapy and radiation, you're not correcting the root cause, which is a metabolic energy problem. That's one thing. And the second, you are harming the immune system. So when you look at the root cause of the problem and you correct it, then you have a better chance.
Vitamin C, it's really a neat molecule because it's something so simple that sometimes we have problems with the physicians understanding how important vitamin C could be because it's so of a simple molecule. But you know, the main thing is that it looks like it's structure, in terms of structure, it's similar to sugar. So that's one of the mechanisms that cancer cells use because cancer cells have more glucose receptors. So when you don't have glucose there, they think vitamin C is glucose, so they bring them in. And in the presence of oxygen, you have two hydrogens, two oxygens, and you produce hydrogen peroxide, which kills cancer cells and doesn't do anything to normal cells because they have the enzymes necessary to break that down. So that's one of the issues. It looks like glucose, but it behaves different.
In the beginning, many years ago, it was a problem. Like a lot of people didn't believe in our work, didn't want to even listen. But nowadays, more and more people are open to the idea that it's true because there's more and more evidence. And there are some oncologists now that are using supplements to improve energy and correct the metabolism, and even vitamin C as part of the cancer treatment.
This is vitamin B12. Now, there is B12 in the B complex. There is B12 in the multiple. You get B12 in yogurt and meats and in dairy products and fish. But B12 is needed more as we get older. And men in particular, and elderly men in particular, seem to have more and more trouble absorbing B12. And for that reason, I'm not going to swallow this one. This is methylcobalamin, which is a form of B12 that's easier to absorb, and you just put it under your tongue and you let it dissolve.
So does all this mean you're going to live to 140 and never get sick?
No, it means that I'll live hopefully to be 140 and I'll still get sick because everybody gets sick. It's not about getting sick, it's about getting better. I don't take these because I'm afraid of getting sick. I'm taking these because I don't want to be sick. I'm going to be sick. Everyone is sick. That's just the way it goes. The trick is how you get better. And if you do it upright, would you be sick less often? Sure. Will I live to be 140? Probably not. But I'd settle for 120.
Orthomolecular medicine seems to be a very male-dominated world. So at the conference, I'm glad to find prominent American MD Hyla Cass. She's an expert in integrative medicine, psychiatry and addiction recovery. And she's one of many to be hugely influenced by the man whose name has come up more than any other in my conversations, the grandfather of orthomolecular medicine, Abram Hoffer.
Hoffer was brilliant because the biochemistry he knew at the time was really good. But we have even more knowledge now to show how really correct he was. And what an amazing, amazing contribution he made. And it is such a shame that what happened was, of course, pharmaceuticals came in around that time. And of course, that wiped him out because Big Pharma will win every time. Supplements are important because even if you're eating a good diet, our organic food even does not have the same nutritional amount of vitamins and minerals, the same values as they did, say, 20 years ago. I mean, I remember how tomatoes used to taste. I remember. They don't taste like that anymore. Even organic ones, although those are better. They certainly are better. And we're also fighting. We're fighting pollution. It's everywhere. You know, the polar bears in the Arctic have evidence of pollution. There's no way to escape it. So what we have to do are take vitamins, minerals, antioxidants, many, many different supplements in order to counter the pollution, to counter and detox so that we can maintain our health.
I probably came into the field more dishonestly than anybody else. Abram Hoffer was my mother's younger brother. And so growing up, he was a psychiatrist. And what did I know about psychiatry? And it was just part of my life. I'd heard about Uncle Abram. And it just seemed logical over the times that I was with him, our family events and so on. I wanted to do what he did.
As a psychiatrist, Gary Vicker deals with a range of illness. But for 40 years, his passion has been schizophrenia, which he treats nutritionally, but not always exclusively.
In the most severely ill patients, you absolutely have to use medications. Where the vitamins become very important, and even the traditional literature supports it, is you reduce the side effect burden, you can reduce the dosage of the medications. And if you get a patient early enough, patients can be dropped down to very, very tiny amounts of medicine.
So what were his uncle's main discoveries that have had such an impact?
Now, Hofer, interestingly enough, was the very first person to show that if you take niacin, you can lower cholesterol. And now there are cardiologists giving niacin with the other drugs because it turns out to be a very good cholesterol-lowering agent. But of course, the drug companies make it look like niacin is dangerous, whereas the statins are so-called safe. It's really not true. Then they discovered vitamin C as an extremely important antioxidant. And then they looked at B6 and said, wait a minute, B6 is vital to every single nutrient interaction in our bodies. They're like cofactors. And I tell my patients, if you've seen the ads on television for detergents that have enzymes, what are enzymes? Well, they're things that make the equation move more efficiently. They're like additives to your car. If you want to add a little bit of STP or whatever they call it, make it more efficient. It doesn't get necessarily used up, but it makes everything else more efficient. So that's the whole principle. And from the 50s till now, it's been refined.
Abram Hofer's son John is a respected college professor in his own right. John has continued research into vitamin C and, amazingly, discovered a huge number of hospital patients are severely lacking.
Ours is a typical tertiary care, sophisticated acute hospital, and 60%, we've showed it year after year, of the patients had subnormal vitamin C levels. 1 in 5 patients had blood levels compatible with scurvy. Is that really scurvy, or is that something else? And what are the implications? No one knew it because no one had looked. And when I pointed it out to other people, it was just so far out of their radar screen that they just would sort of register it and forget it, as is typical of new ideas.
Now, Abram Hofer had as a patient Bill W., the co-founder of Alcoholics Anonymous. That's the Bill W., as in, hi, my name's Bill and I'm an alcoholic, Bill W. He was a patient of Dr. Hofer's. Well, Bill W. started taking niacin because of depression, severe depression, that often is unfortunately part and parcel of getting off of alcohol, especially long-term use. So Bill W. took Abram's advice, which is wise, and he took 3,000 milligrams of niacin a day, and his depression was gone in a week. So Bill talked to friends of his and said, hey, you got to try this. And they took vitamin B3, niacin, and about a third of them had the same results. They were better in a week. And another third were better in about a month. And another third didn't notice much difference. But to Bill W., 2 out of 3 people with alcoholic depression being cured with niacin in 1 week to 4 weeks was pretty good. So Bill W., on his own letterhead, at his own expense, and independent of AA, wrote 3 papers on the importance of niacin in treating alcoholism and alcoholic depression.
Well, Abram Hofer was a very precise man. Everything that came out of his mouth emanated from a very biochemical worldview. It doesn't mean that he wasn't personable and lovely and nice and kind, and he had a quick wit about him. He was really just quite funny and humorous, but he really saw the world from a biochemical perspective, and he really felt that with good nutrition, particularly optimal doses of different micronutrients, he could really modulate a person's biochemistry in such a way that they would have better mental and physical health. When I give somebody treatment, it's really individualized to what it is that they want help with. But I use things like niacin, which is vitamin B3. I use essential fatty acids. I use magnesium. I use basically all the B vitamins, B12 in particular. I use vitamin C. I use, you name it. Basically, there's about 40 essential micronutrients that we need every day. And I try to individualize as best as I can what micronutrient combinations would help a patient that I'm seeing with mental health issues to have better emotional regulation.
Jonathan shocked me, talking about just how damaging some psychiatric drugs can be to patients.
They'll typically live on average 10 to 25 years less than somebody who's not on the antipsychotics, so they reduce lifespan, which is something that they're never told about when they actually are given the drugs in the first place. They get metabolic disease, so they have problems with their heart, they have problems regulating their blood sugar, and they often gain huge amounts of weight.
I had presumed that with the development of humankind over the past 50 years, things would be much better than they were during Abraham Hoffer's career. But sadly, that doesn't seem to be the case.
The current climate of mental health care is abysmal. It's just god-awful. Psychiatric drugs are not correcting any biochemical problem. They're actually creating biochemical problems in the brain, and it's a result of how they disable certain processes in the brain that they de-intensify symptoms. People are now acculturated into believing they need all these drugs, so we have a sociocultural phenomena that sort of makes people believe they need these drugs to be well, when the evidence does not support that. So people have been sold lies about how psychiatric drugs are actually helping them, when in fact all they're doing is disabling various brain processes as a way to de-intensify symptoms.
Jonathan's particularly concerned about attention deficit hyperactivity disorder.
It's become a catch-all diagnostic label. We are seeing now a huge overinflation of who gets that label, and as a result we're seeing an overinflation of who is being prescribed psychiatric medication. And to me, it's nothing short of, it's disgusting, it's despicable, it's inhumane. We should not be drugging our kids, particularly when their brains are so vulnerable, they're developing. What they need is attuned, empathic, loving care that has to come from all avenues of their life. Most of the time when kids are expressing the symptoms of ADHD, what they're really expressing is the distress in their lives. I don't know what to say. I don't know how to say it, except it breaks my heart. It's not the way a highly industrialized world should be tending to the most vulnerable. Most parents, because they are born into this very medically dominated world, they come to believe now that the only option is drugging, and that somehow it's fixing a biochemical imbalance. The only imbalance it's fixing is the imbalance that the parents feel because they're overwhelmed. There's no defect in a child who has ADHD in that child's brain. It's never been found, and it never will be. The only defects that are found are kids who are on medications. That's when you get different changes within the brain and different changes to how the brain functions.
Andrew Saul's first teaching job wasn't in college, it was in prison. 2 prisons, in fact, Albion and Orleans Correctional. He discovered the inmates had pretty appalling diets, so he gave them some advice about improving things.
So that's what they did. They stopped eating sugary foods, and they put wheat germ on pretty much everything, and they took a cheap multivitamin every single meal. One day after class, I guess it was 2 or 3 weeks later, this really big inmate was on his way out through the door, and it was a job because he was taller than the door was, so he had to duck, and he was wider than the door was, so he had to turn. So he's ducking and turning, and he stops, and he turns around, and he looks at me, and he says, "Can I talk to you for a minute?" And I said, "Yeah." "I've been doing that multivitamin every meal that you talked about." And I said, "Yeah?" "I just wanted you to know." "Yeah?" "I feel more clear." And he left. And I've thought over the years, what would be the long-term benefits of more inmates becoming more clear in prison? You can get those vitamins for 5 or 6 cents a day, probably cheaper if you buy them in bulk. Remember that everyone that's in jail, unless they're in for life, all of those inmates are going to be coming out at some point. It would be nice to help fix them up nutritionally. We spend $50,000 to $100,000 per inmate per year to put them in jail and keep them there. For another 6 cents a day, we could help them feel more clear. There are some illnesses that respond to fairly low doses. One of the most interesting ones was with HIV-positive men at Johns Hopkins, a very reputable institution, back in 1993. And they studied 281 HIV-positive men for about 6.5 years. Those that took vitamins were only half as likely to develop AIDS. Now, if there was a drug that did that, you would have heard about it. But a lot of people watching me right now have never heard of this before. Gets better. About 10 years later, Harvard, you all have heard of Harvard, Harvard did a study and showed exactly the same thing, that HIV-positive people who took vitamins were about half as likely to develop full-blown AIDS. But the Harvard study showed something else that was interesting, a 27% decrease in deaths from AIDS.
The final interview of my travels is with a man who's probably been responsible for more vitamin C megadose infusions than anyone else. He's the Chief Medical Officer of the Reardon Clinic, which has been treating cancer patients for 40 years. Ron Honninghake.
I recently estimated that I've overseen probably 100,000 intravenous vitamin C infusions. Didn't mean I actually did them myself, but I have done about 300 on my wife because I would do her at home, and she had a great vein, and I called it Old Faithful, and 2 or 3 nights a week we would, after she had gotten home from teaching, I would just hook her up, and so she would sleep better, she felt better. She not only had breast cancer, she also had fibromyalgia and chronic fatigue. So in many ways, her journey through the cancer illness actually helped her to improve on the chronic fatigue and fibromyalgia, because all the vitamin C and all the nutrient changes that we made to help her get through that cancer regimen was actually good for helping her heal the other chronic illnesses.
Ron believes there's a way to improve a weak genetic blueprint, using his own family as an example.
It looks like a mess. I mean, it looks like I should be diabetic right now because I have 3 uncles that are diabetic. My father became diabetic. My grandmother was diabetic. I have a cousin, first cousin, who's already lost a foot to diabetes. I have a brother that's diabetic, and yet I'm not. Why not? Because I've been engaged in diet, supplements, exercise, meditation, stress management. All these things have a meaning in terms of helping us prevent illness or recover from illness. And once you start putting that all together, we have a tremendous healing system that standard medicine can't really touch.
As I come to the end of my journey into the world of megavitamins, Ron also has an encouraging message for the future as he leads new research into individual patients' genetic needs.
It's where we do genomic studies of each person to find out what their genome, their epigenetics is, because then we can start matching nutrient blood levels, which we do a lot of at the Reardon Clinic, with their genetic situation and their symptoms and what they've noticed about themselves, and we can start to create a grand synthesis, kind of a symphony of changes that really helps their body come into a full musicality, I guess is the only, where you're orchestrating all the elements. Standard medicine is all about treating symptoms, putting Band-Aids on problems. Now we're looking at the root causes and finding ways to correct that and give people an opportunity to live not only to 100, but a golden 100, not this 30 years of chronic illness that most people have at the end of their life.
It's a fascinating prospect to live to 100 with full mental and physical function, and a fitting end to an epic journey of discovery. For my fellow traveller Trevor and for me, this has been life-changing. We're both paying much more attention to our diets and are taking more supplements than ever before. Nutrition has helped Trevor to take the final steps to completely get out from under the shadow of depression. This experience opened a door and started a journey which is unlikely to end here.
1, 2, 3, 4.
If you go to Guy's Hospital in London, they have McDonald's in the food court. If you go to Addenbrooke's Hospital up in Cambridge, which is the last word in cardiology teaching in the Northern Hemisphere, you have Burger King next to a sign that says blood tests this way.
Miracles can happen because the body is a self-healing organism. We are made to really take care of ourselves. And if we give the body what it needs, it will do the job.
Said I can, and I won't let you know.
I could only go along with that paradigm of not using vitamins if you live in paradise, if you're, with no stress, if you have your personal chef, and your personal trainer.
Don't take chances, take vitamins. That's what you need to do.